Hey everybody, welcome to the channel. For those of you that are subscribed to the channel, thanks for that, and also thank you for coming to see this video. For those of you on YouTube or wherever you search this video from, you came here because you saw Mossman in the title. Thank you for coming to visit as well. For those that have a YouTube channel, then you know that you really like to upload quality videos, and you'd like for them all to be perfect, and rarely are they always perfect, right? So, but if ever there was a video that I wanted to do perfectly, it would be this video. And I don't even think the intro was good enough to do justice to what we're going to talk about tonight. So I hold a piece of history in my hands as it relates to boutique builders in the United States. As a matter of fact, the man that owned the shop where this one was built, there was so much to this guy that I couldn't possibly squeeze it into a video. But let me say this: Scott Baxendale started out his luthier life working for Stuart Mossman in Kansas, in a very small town in Kansas, Winfield, Kansas, and learned from the best luthier, at least in my opinion, that's I think ever lived. Just a very quality guy. So if you have never heard of Mossman Guitars, this was a company that was founded by a gentleman named Stuart Mossman, and I'm counting on Scott Baxendale to correct anything I have wrong here, but I believe he worked for Gibson at one time. And I think it was in the early to mid 1960s when he worked there. And so I think he had wanted to go to work for Martin and tried to go to work for Martin, and they wouldn't hire him. And he was really getting put out with mass-produced guitars. So I've read a couple of different articles that says one says the shop put out about 5,000 guitars total in its lifetime under Stuart's guidance, and another one said that they put out about 6,000 guitars. So I don't know which one's right, but either way you look at it, that is a small number of guitars. And I'm going to drop a link in the description. I'm begging you to read the description. There's a link in there. I also have this very same video that I'm going to drop a link to on my community tab. So if you go to my channel and you'll see across the top, it's home, videos, a couple of other tabs. But one of those tabs is a tab called community. And periodically I'll upload a video there if I think it deserves to be there. And Scott uploaded last week. And by the way, I don't know how long it's going to take me to make this video, so I'm not sure when I'm going to release it. Last week, it was last week, I think, last Friday or Saturday, somewhere in there, Scott put a video out. It was a documentary, and I'm going to put the gentleman up that did the documentary right about here. It's a very interesting story. The video is about an hour and a half long, and folks, when you start watching it, you can't stop. So I hope you block out an hour and a half, because you're going to need every minute of it. Maybe a little longer than an hour and a half, but I could not stop watching this video. It was fascinating to read this story. I'll tell you how I knew about Mossman to begin with. I've got a friend of mine that I grew up with up in Mesquite, Texas, and from the time we were little kids. And he lives in Sulphur Springs, and of course I live in Mineola, Texas, so we're about 20, 30 minutes apart. And he asked me if I had ever heard of Mossman guitars. This was several years ago, and I said, no, I don't believe I have. And so he said, well, I've got a friend of mine over here in Sulphur Springs that builds Mossman guitars. He said, you ought to look him up and check him out sometime. And so I'll tell you that story. That gentleman's name was Bobby Casey, who recently passed away. But back to Stuart for a moment. Just a phenomenal guy, and I'm not going to go through everything they covered in the documentary that Scott put out. Scott's in that documentary, by the way. He was there in Winfield, Kansas, when all this was taking off in the mid-'70s. And I think the shop opened around 1965 or so. I was probably about 7 years old when that shop opened. But he was tired of, Stuart was, he was tired of the mass-produced guitars and the lack of quality that were coming out of the larger manufacturers. And he felt like it wasn't right. And so he started a shop and started building guitars. And, you know, David Carradine was a client. If you've ever seen the movie The Long Riders, that is one of my all-time favorite Western movies. When you get to the part with the train, and I think it's Bobby Carradine that actually goes up to the engine, the main engine where the train engineers are. And that train engineer was actually Stuart Mossman. I never caught that in that movie, ever, because I didn't know what Stuart looked like, actually, so there's no way I could have caught it. But the Carradine boys liked him so much that they got him a couple of gigs, short gigs, in a few of the movies. David Carradine was particularly fond of him, as well as Keith and Bobby. Now, what's interesting about all of this, before we play this particular one, and I'll talk a little bit about it, and I'll put some photos up. These guitars are not easy to find. And when you do find them, they're not easy to find where they've actually been reworked a little bit. And by reworked, this one is a 1975. It's a Tennessee flat top. It is the least expensive guitar that Stuart sold, that he built and sold. But I'm going to tell you something. I have, in the dreadnaught class, I have never played a guitar that sounded like this, ever. I was absolutely blown away the first time I made a chord on this guitar. It's had a neck reset. The body is checked. It's full of checking. Somebody took this thing outside frequently and played it. And it saw a few temperature changes over the years, I think. But the neck is good and straight. There's no warping. There's no belly lift on this guitar. It is... it's stunning. I have not put a camera down inside this guitar to look at the bracing, because frankly, I don't want my phone to damage my guitar. I'm just afraid I'll damage my guitar. So I haven't done that. This video is going to be longer than most, and because this gentleman and the luthiers he hired and the work that he did at that shop, in the documentary that Scott posted, it talks about the fact that David Carradine said he actually saw him throw one into the fire pit because it just wasn't right. This man did not let a guitar go out the door. Scott, correct me if I'm wrong. that he didn't personally inspect and play. That's pretty special. He initialed this guitar. He initialed all of them. And I think Scott told me, and I'll put some of the text message exchanges that I had with Scott. We talked over the weekend, Saturday I think it was, quite a bit about this guitar, and I'll put some of that conversation up. And that's why I've got this Silvertone out, by the way, because Scott rebuilt that Silvertone, and never have I played a triple O guitar or an OM guitar that sounded even remotely close to that Silvertone 319 behind me, because Scott's the one that rebraced that. And it is incredible to play and from a sound standpoint. This was one guitar that I was not even remotely hesitant about ordering online. This guitar came out of Minnesota. And I don't know who owned it, but they played it, and they played it quite a bit. It's got an ebony fretboard. According to Scott, it's got an ebony bridge. These are ebony bridge pins. It's got the original tuners on it. I'll put some pictures up of that. It's all original, folks. It has coral snake binding, purfling around this top and this binding, and I'll try to get a good close picture of that so you can see it. It's absolutely beautiful. Now, this has been compared to kind of, I think Stuart had said, and Scott mentioned it, that this was built to kind of a direct competition to the Martin D18. There is no competition there, folks. This thing is absolutely incredible. You know, I talked a little bit about that Epiphone inspired by Gibson J45 having this kind of a pulsing frequency coming out of that guitar when you play it, the sustain on it. Doesn't hold a candle to this guitar. Folks, I have never in my life played a guitar that sounded this good. This is something else to behold. So anyway, it was a very sought after instrument by David Carradine, Keith Carradine, Bobby Carradine, John Denver, Emmylou Harris. There's a list of names of people that to this very day are still looking for these guitars and own some. And that's what they play. They play a Stuart L. Mossman guitar. Now that company was sold, I believe, around mid-'80s. I'll let you watch the documentary to get the history between the 60s and the 80s. But Scott ended up with the company. And I think Stuart was proud of that. And he moved operations to Garland, Texas, which is about an hour and a half from me, maybe 2 hours. And you have to go to Scott's website, and I'll put it up and read his bio, because it's just it's pretty amazing, the guitars that he's worked on and the people that entrusted their guitars for him to work on over the years. But that shop in Winfield, Kansas, turned out the best luthiers that this nation's ever seen, in my opinion. Now, the stickers on the inside, Scott had told me that the shop burned in February of 1975, burned down. And They didn't rebuild the shop and get it back open until around August of 1975, and Scott says that's probably when he thinks that's when this one was built, was in August of 75, because the department heads are the ones that initial this. And he gave me all the names, and I'm going to put those up, except one of them, neither one of us could read the initials well enough to say who that was. And you will notice, and I've got this in the text, there is a blank spot between, on the bottom towards the right, there is a blank spot where initials should be. And Scott said back in those days that you could get up and go get a cup of coffee, and if the label for that guitar was going by your desk, you might miss signing it. So I think his initials should be in here. And at some point, I will eventually send this to Scott when the need arises, and I'll get him to put his initials in there on that sticker, because I think they belong there, and he's pretty positive of it himself. So, but this is the Sitka spruce top, mahogany back and sides, Tennessee flat top. Now, I'm sure Stuart made a few mahogany guitars besides the Tennessee flat top, but I think the bulk of them were more than likely rosewood, and there was what was called the golden era. It had golden era. It had a vine all the way down the neck. They're absolutely beautiful. When you watch that documentary, that's on my community tab, or you can find it on Scott's YouTube channel, you will see where some of the work that was done on these, just amazing. So, I have longed for one of these guitars for a long time. But the main issue is when you go to buying a guitar that is 48 years old, which is what this one is come August this year. Then you're going to need a neck reset probably. And so that's one of the reasons I decided to go ahead and pick this one up. It's the most ugly, beautiful guitar I've ever owned, but from a checking standpoint, because this one has more checking on it than any other guitar I've ever seen. You can't see it probably that well in the video, but trust me, it has a ton of checking on it. But the sound over the years... There is a sweetness to that there is no way on God's green earth I'm going to get that across on YouTube. I think it would ring forever. If ever there were a video I wanted to do a little justice with, this is it. Or as much as I can. I think, it's a tragic story how what happened to that business, and it was just an oversight in a contract. And I think Stuart passed away way too early in life. But folks, he didn't let guitars go out the door that he didn't sign off on. And he was not afraid to throw them in the fire if they didn't meet his expectations. I just don't see that level of quality and concern today in guitars. I mean, don't get me wrong. I appreciate a good Gibson. I appreciate a good Martin. But the guitars are so mass-produced these days that personal touch is missing in many of them. And that's not to say you can't find a guitar that you can bond with and sounds good. Because you can. I mean, I've recently picked up a few that I was blown away that at the sound and pretty good quality for the price. But this will never, as long as I'm alive, I'm not cutting this guitar loose. Somebody would have to tell me an awfully sad story to get me to part with it. I'm not saying I wouldn't if the story wasn't sad enough, but in other words, my brother owned that guitar, and we never knew what happened to it. We think he sold it in a pawn shop, and it meant the world to him, and he sold it because he didn't have any money and he was hungry, and well, family sure would like to have, okay, maybe I might do that. And I don't want to see that in the comments, folks. Don't start telling me about how your brother got hungry and sold his Mossman, okay? But anyway, so Scott actually ended up with the company, moved it to Garland. There's a huge story there, by the way. And Scott, I don't remember how many guitars were produced when you had it. It seems like, now I'm not even going to put a number out there because I don't know. It wasn't very many though, I don't think. And then Bobby Casey over in Sulphur Springs ended up with it. And Bobby, I don't think, produced more than a handful of guitars, maybe 50 at the most. And he was a heck of a luthier. Scott knows him because that's where the company came from. Well, Mossman is now owned. Believe it or not, this brand has not died yet. And it may never. Well, someday everything will, but I don't know that this name is not going to live on. There's a gentleman in Canton, Texas, half hour from me, west, and he bought Mossman from Bobby Casey, and he trained under Bobby Casey. And I reached out to him recently. Haven't heard back from him yet. But I do want to know what his intentions are with Mossman. So he bought all of the tooling, everything. And I saw an interview with him on YouTube. Somebody, maybe it was Texas Country Reporter or somebody, did an interview with Bobby, and Mike Austell was there. I think his last name's Austell. And he's the one that bought it from Bobby. So, from Bobby Casey. So, the guitar company is still breathing. And I truly hope that Mike took everything he learned from Bobby Casey and does something with this company and doesn't try to skimp, because that was something that Stuart Mossman, Bobby Casey, Scott Baxendale wouldn't do. And so I hope that goes with the name. I really do hope that it continues on. Folks, a richer, deeper, square-shouldered dreadnought, or any dreadnought, have I ever heard. And I recently picked one up, two square-shouldered dreadnoughts that were absolutely beautiful sound to them. And this Mossman is better than that. And I didn't think I'd ever pick up a dreadnought that could outdo those two guitars. Well, there you have it, folks. My short, unworthy video on a 1975 Tennessee flat top. After the fire, rebuilt the factory. This is one of the guitars right after the fire. And I have to say that I think the fire made them more determined than ever, because what an instrument I've got in my hands right now, folks. I will say that periodically you'll see one come up for sale. I think there's a couple out there right now, but those that I looked at were going to need work. So, if you're rolling $3 to $5 grand for them, and you're gonna roll even more, because you're gonna need to get somebody that knows what they're doing and get the neck reset, check the bracing, just make sure the guitar is good. But I don't ever want the bracing modified on this guitar. I want this exact bracing that's in there from this day forward. I just want this guitar preserved. And whatever I got to do that, I'll mortgage the house if I have to. That's how much I think of this guitar, folks. If you find a Mossman out there that somebody hadn't laid down in a river somewhere because they didn't know what they had, or left it out in the yard in the sun all day long, then by all means, please join the club. You won't regret it. I didn't have to, but I think for sure after getting this one in my hands and playing it, I think I would have mortgaged my house to get it. That's what I think of this guitar, folks. That's what I think of it. And that's how highly I think of Scott Baxendale in Santa Fe, New Mexico. A very accessible man. He's been a good friend to me. And I think the world of him. I think he's very talented, and he was more than blessed with the course his life took that led him to Stuart Mossman. And I think Scott would definitely give him and the other luthiers in that shop credit for making him everything he is today, which is one of the most sought after luthiers on this planet. So, Scott, you lived a history very few people can even think about and consider experiencing in their life. It's that legacy. Yeah, that's fantastic. That's just absolutely fantastic. After I watched that documentary, I mean, I already loved Scott. Thought he was a great guy, and he's been really, really good to me over these last several years. But I didn't think it was possible to have more respect for him, but I do. You know, some of the greats that wanted a Baxendale guitar and wanted a Mossman guitar. If you think about who holds Baxendales these days, Jason Isbell. There's so many that think that highly of Scott. A lot of people. So I think he's led a pretty blessed life. I'm sure it's had a lot of difficulties and a lot of tragedies, just like you and I do. But nonetheless, the people he was surrounded with, you know, I've always said this, and I think my dad's the one that told me this. He said, "Son, you don't have to be so smart. You just need to make sure you're surrounded with some very smart people, and you'll probably do well in life." And I just never forgot that. You know, that is absolutely true. For those of us that live on an island, we die on an island. For those of us that utilize the people around us for their good, for ours, yeah, that's how you get by in life. God and good friends, and life will take you places you never dreamed of. I'm not worthy to be sitting here talking about any of this. I shouldn't even be on YouTube. I don't even know why I don't even know how I got here. I looked this morning, we had over 900 subscribers. Yeah, that's not a million by a long shot. It's not, you know, but who in the world would have ever thought 900 people would be the least bit interested in what I got to say? But, you know, we try to be genuine on this channel and as honest, as totally honest. At least in my mind, I'm honest about it on this channel. The things I tell you and the things we talk about. Folks, I'm not steering you wrong on this one. I'm not suggesting you mortgage your house to get one of these guitars, but I'm the only kind of nutcase that would probably do something like that. But I'm shocked. I'm just shocked at this guitar. I love it. I absolutely love it. Gosh, what a bunch of geniuses put this guitar together. That's all I got to say. They knew guitars. Brother man, sister girl. They knew guitars. These people knew guitars. The best of the best in this business built this guitar. Yes, sir. You find something that says Mossman on the headstock, you got something. This headstock is the logos have changed a little bit over the years, but Mossman is on there. And then, of course, don't forget Scott Bill's Custom Guitars. He doesn't pay me. I just think the world of him and think he's talented, and I think everybody ought to know about him. And I wished I'd have known about him 10 years earlier. But you see something that says Baxendale across here? Or Baxendale in this sound hole? Or Mossman? Anywhere on this headstock? SL Mossman or just Mossman on there? Yeah, and you can do it. This is something to pull the trigger on. It's an absolute work of art. Not so much because of the wood I hold in my hands, but more so the talent of those folks that poured themselves into each and every one of these guitars that they built. And I'm telling you, they poured themselves into them, and I can tell from playing it. God bless and rest Stuart Mossman. And if any of you luthiers out there that worked for him happen by the channel, or you own a Mossman guitar. Yeah, I'd love to hear your story too in the comments if you want to, or shoot me an email, either one. I always put my email in the description at the bottom. So, yeah, I just this embodies people striving to do their best. That's what this guitar, that's what it is. That's what it is to me. That's what it represents. And I think the sound tells that story, folks. 48 years later. Once again, the documentary, I'll drop a link to it that Scott did, and it's also on my community tab. And yeah, very much. The Mossman story is a great story. The Baxendale story is quite an interesting story as well. And Scott actually released a video a day or two ago about building a guitar for Johnny Depp. It's this is an interesting journey when they first did this. This was some years ago. But after the first one or two of the Pirates of the Caribbean, I think, is about when that was. And I don't know how long ago that movie came out, but I think it was a while back. But it's a good video as well. It shows you what determination could do sometimes, you know. But anyway, folks, take care of your friends. Take care of your family. God bless. We'll see you next time.